you know that because of our moral ambivalence, each of us, we're less committed to our task than we might be. We're plagued by existential doubts. We're held back by our resentment and our bitterness. We get in our own way. We have an ambivalent sense of whether we're worthy as individuals or as a species for that matter. And so we stumble forward half crippled, and maybe we move towards the light regardless, but we're not all in by any stretch of the imagination as individuals or as a culture or as any culture. So then you ask yourself, well, what would you be like if you were all in? And then what would a culture be like if it was composed of people who were nothing but all in? If we devoted everything we had to the task at hand, to the highest good, and we moved away from our adversarial identification and our nihilism and our desire for destruction and our willingness to wallow in misery and to perpetuate it. Well, what would we do? Would we defeat death? Would we bring about immortal life? Would we resurrect the dead? Who knows what we could do? I don't see that human possibility is bounded in any realistic sense. What we've already accomplished is absolutely beyond comprehension. And there are many things that we don't understand at all. And many of those things are going to be revolutionary. They're going to change the way we look at everything. You turn a blind eye. And ancient stories warn about this all the time. You turn a blind eye and then things go rotten under your sovereignty. And by the time you're awake, it's too late. And that isn't, you've abdicated your responsibility. And that happens bit by bit, right? That's the other thing about it that's so pernicious. It's like people ask me, for example, why I chose this bill in Canada to die as a hill to die on, let's say. And it's like, well, you're going to say no. If you ever say no, you're going to say no to something trivial, because things that go astray bit by bit. And so there's virtually never a sliding point where everyone says, oh, no. It's like, well, this much more. Well, I'm uneasy, but I accept. Well, then it's a little worse and you're a little lesser. And then it's this much more, you know? And the probability that will happen is there all the time. And it's as moral citizens that who have a moral obligation to see what's in front of us, that we hold that at bay always. It's with our eyes open. That's why Horus in the Egyptian story is the eye. He's not thinking. It's not thought. It's attention. See. It's the willingness to turn your eyes to the phenomena and see what's there. And the Egyptians regarded that as part of what was redemptive. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. You know, conscious attention as the source of eternal redemption. Right. And I spent a lot of time talking about this in Maps of Meaning. So your interest manifests itself in ways you can't control, right? The instinct of meaning manifests itself, and then you follow it. That's the spirit Mercurius, right? He's the winged messenger of the gods. And so something brightens up for you, and you follow that, and you find your destiny that way. Jung's notion was that was the manner in which your potential future self manifested itself in the present and pulled you along. And so an example of that would be, maybe you're a child and you find someone you admire, and so they sort of glow, and then you mimic them. And it's because the mechanisms in your mind that are propelling you towards maturation find someone who's like you, so they're in the zone of proximal development, but somewhat more advanced. You latch onto them as an idol, let's say, and you mimic them, and that catalyzes your development. So that's the manifestation of interest. Now imagine that you pathologize that by through deceit and self-deception and refusal to attend to what's right in front of you. Well, you make yourself weak because you don't develop well, but you also pathologize that mechanism. The question is, what do you doom yourself to if you remain banal? And I think you doom yourself to an unconscious fascination with unearned power. So in some sense, she had the causal story backwards.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah. So
we're not designed to be banal, right? Like we don't respect ourselves then. We're designed to, so to speak, like many of us are designed to bear a heavy burden, right? To be of service to our fellow man. We find meaning in that, deep meaning. And if we're not doing that, then our lives are not deep and meaningful, and then the suffering can easily make us corrupt.
Maybe it's too easy in a large society like ours to hide in the nooks and crannies and be banal without having to be on the front lines and pay the price.
It's very dissatisfying to young people when that's the case. You know, their heart burns, but they have nowhere to go, and they can't tolerate that. Like Piaget, for example, pointed out that although you never hear this when you study developmental psychology, you have to read Piaget. He pointed out that late adolescents reliably go through a messianic phase, right? They're compelled to change the world. They feel called out to this quasi-messianic destiny. And certainly ideologues are great at harnessing that. But that needs to be placed within what I would say is a proper traditional/religious context. And this is one of the great advantages I truly believe that Christianity has, perhaps not over other faiths. I'm not making that case, but certainly in contrast to ideologies. It's like, well, you harness that messianic spirit to organize and purify, so to speak, your own soul. You don't go over after an external enemy. And there's a heroic battle in that. That's the battle between the adversary and the hero. And that's within, not external. It's within. It's safer that way. Much safer. And then you have good citizens if that works out, because they get themselves in order. You know, and more than in order. More than in order. They become masters of chaos as well as order. And that's also what I see as something that's so profound about the biblical narrative, because it insists upon this psychologization of utopia. It becomes a psychological drama, not a political drama. It's a psychological drama. The moral battle takes place within the confines of your own psyche. And I think people know that because they see that they're tortured by their own consciences. Yeah, well, we're not animals in a zoo. Like we're not camels in a zoo. We're not herbivores. You know, and just because we have enough straw doesn't mean we're going to lose our unbelievable capacity for destructive creation. And we don't know how to harness that. You know, and I've been trying, I suppose, in some sense to meet that desire for a call to adventure with what I'm writing and with my lectures and to use responsibility in this moral domain as a battle that's of sufficient intensity to engage young people in particular property. It's like, get yourself together. See how difficult that is. See what you can do. Put yourself together. Stop doing the things you know to be wrong and see what happens. Put yourself together. And there's been an unbelievable response to that. And I think it's harmless in some sense, or as harmless as such things can be, because it is focused. It's like, change you. Leave the other people alone. Or if you want to change them, maybe you can do it through example. You know, but they're not the problem. You have enough problems with yourself. It's like, well, what are you complaining about? You've got enough to eat. It's like, fair enough, you know, who wants to starve, right? And so it's even hard to fight against. Well, I should be grateful for that. And yes, you should, but it's not enough. And you think about where we came from, our ancestors, what they struggled against. And from the time we were, you know, from our animal forebears all the way up to where we are now, whatever we're made for, it's not Twinkies and TV. You know, it's not willful blindness and the comfort that brings. It's not enough. And so we need this adventure. And that's something we're going to all have to contend with, because if we don't get the adventure right, then we'll get it wrong and it'll lead us in terrible places.